So everyone's going to have their opinion about this movie, and I'm simply giving mine, but what I will do is try to at least open this review up by setting the tone for it, okay? So essentially, let's talk about the expectations of the film. If you feel as though they didn't have enough LGBT representation and maybe you wanted to see a little bit more, they did that for you in this film. If you feel like they didn't have enough black representation, they did that for you in this film as well. They even gave you a little nod with Mary J. Blige by playing Mary J. Blige in a Thor film. So if you thought that'd be like a really neat thing, well, there you go. Now, in terms of the tonality of, like, you know, from the last films to this film, if you like more of a lighthearted, more of a comedy-centric kind of film that tells a lot of jokes, like think Chris Pratt, like constantly in Guardians of the Galaxy, that's what this film kind of targets, versus like, let's say, some of the darker things in, you know, Thor Dark World or like even the first film. It doesn't really take the dark, serious approach. It's more of a humorous film. So I think just opening up the movie that way, I think that can kind of help you digest this film a little bit better. And from there, I'll start my review. Now, to give a little bit more for parental guidelines for those parents out there who maybe want to be mindful of what their child is consuming, I don't recommend this for small children. If you don't want to have that conversation explaining to your kid what an orgy is, do not take your kid to watch this film, because that does come up in one of the lines. Another thing that comes up is kind of like a catchphrase throughout the movie where the characters are like, oh shit, or they say shit a little bit much in the film. So if your kid like maybe looks at superheroes and likes to say their catchphrase or say something they saw their favorite superhero saying over and over again, then this probably is not going to be the film for a small child, right? And then continuing with that theme of small children and this not being appropriate for them, I think, again, if you're somebody who doesn't like nudity in movies, whether you're a small child or an adult, period, like, let's say you're a married couple, you want just family night, and you don't really want to see, like, Thor completely naked, this is not going to be the movie for you. Now, there's no full frontal, but they do show rear, and they do show him, obviously, shirtless all the way down to basically the sex line. So you can see a decent amount of the guy, and they even objectify him to the point of having the female actors, like, kind of sit back and like grab popcorn and start eating. And then the same can be said like when the women start fainting out like you saw in the trailer. Like, I think that kind of thing really in a movie like this, it doesn't really add much to the plot. And we all kind of know if they switched the roles and they kind of did it to the female actor, everybody would have the biggest tizzy. I mean, really, he was literally naked in the center of an auditorium where like literally tens of thousands of people were, almost like he was an exhibitionist. I personally found that to be pretty distasteful. I felt like they were taking the objectification a little too far, and by little too far, I mean any of it is too far. But, you know, that's just my opinion here. But if you share that opinion, then maybe that will be something to keep in mind. Now, for the final point here, this is for the religious families out there. This is absolutely a no-go for religious families because there is almost like an atheist vibe to the whole movie, anti-God sentiments all throughout. Now, be advised, the character, the main villain, is called Gore the God Butcher, but I think at the end of the day, it can be understood that there are certain messages that can be conveyed through lines and through storyline telling. And one of the things that really struck me was how it was always like, oh, don't pray kind of thing. It's like, you know, you praying doesn't really do anything. The only thing that waits for you after death is death. Basically saying like there is no afterlife. Like that kind of thing can be seen as blasphemous to us religious families. So I think if, again, that's something that you don't want your children watching, you just wanted to show them a cool superhero flick with action, there's a lot more going on underneath the skin than just like heroes and, you know, flashes of lightning. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. Now, the plot of this movie doesn't really have a whole lot to it. It really kind of feels more like a 1,500-year-old coming-of-age story, because Thor is 1,500 years old, and the entire opening of the movie is him trying to find himself. There's these awkward moments with him and the Guardians of the Galaxy, and him like ripping off his like Jesus-esque kind of like turban that he's wearing, or like toga, and like starts, you know, wearing this like rebel jacket to the rock and roll music, and, you know, doing all the you know, it's one of those things where it's like the teenage rebel, you know, rebellious phase nonsense, and it feels like for that to be coming out of a guy that's been around for 1,500 years is a little and then again, the whole like self-doubting thing, like he doesn't know who he is after 1,500 years. I personally don't think he'll ever know, but that's just me. I think that's a lot of time not to know who you are, but that's besides the point. I think, again, when you watch the movie, it's trying to be comedic, but it does it in all the wrong ways. It kind of make Thor a joke. I mean, like, you think Thor, you think like this hardcore badass superhero, but he's been neutered to the point of being literally a joke. And I say that because there are just moments where he's literally there with his broken hammer from like the last movie, and it feels more like they're trying to humiliate him with the way like he has almost like this love relationship between his hammers, where it's just like, oh, I didn't mean anything by talking to my other hammer. Like, it's a very cheesy, very stupid storyline, and I don't think that adds anything to the plot. I know they're trying to be funny, but like it's like constantly throughout the movie, and it really is just boring and like cheesy. Really, it's lame. So I think that's like one of the things that kind of suck the life out of the plot. The other thing that sucks the life out of the plot, at least for me, is their bit on cancer. Now, I personally know people who have died from cancer in my family, and I take it very seriously. So when they portray cancer as like this glamorous thing, like this actress can be in stage 4 cancer, going through chemotherapy and keep all of her hair and a full face of makeup basically, only getting bags in the eyes and showing fatigue towards the end of it, it's offensive because people are dying from that. And if you're going to portray that disability, that handicap, do it properly, do it respectfully. Don't do it in a way that like, you know, oh, I've got cancer. Like, it's not something that you just tout around as like a badge of honor for your movie. Like, that's really disrespectful. And not only that, it's insensitive to everybody who's lost somebody or a loved one to cancer. I did not appreciate that. That, for me, it really upset me. So maybe if you haven't lost somebody to cancer, you won't care. Maybe if you're not going through that, you won't care. But for me, like, I 10 out of 10 do not like that. That is not okay, and that's just what I'll say there. Now, in terms of the plot, I think, again, it struggles because, like, let's be real. No date night is going to be concluded with, you know, your girlfriend or wife or whatever saying, hey, babe, you know what would be great? We go watch that new Thor movie. So obviously the primary demographic, not the only, but the primary demographic is the male audience. And I think that there's a major disconnect with what the guys wanted to see from their superhero to what was actually given. And I think the biggest disconnect is like, they basically made him take a back seat throughout his entire movie to where Jane's the one that has to save the day. And then right down to like enlisting like Heimdall's son, you know, basically creating child soldiers. We never asked for that. And I think like, you know, having a bunch of kids rush the battlefield, I don't think anybody really wanted that. It looked more like recess was being let out than an actual climactic war scene like I imagine they intended. I mean, yeah, sure, he shared his powers with these children, but it was really, even then, it was like comedic and it wasn't really serious. And the whole movie's tone is just not serious. And I think for me, as a Thor fan, I think something that I would have appreciated more is if they played more on his superpower, how crazy it is. I mean, like, I'll give you an example here. This is going to be completely irrelevant, but it will kind of tie to this movie as being relevant in the end. So it's just hang on here, okay? So in the world of anime, there's a type of genre called isekai. And typically somebody dies, comes back to life, and they're super overpowered. I would have loved to see a concept where Thor is this super powerful, omnipotent superhero, and he's just wrecking house, and he's just OP. And everybody's just like in shock and awe by the physical and visual effects that are being blasted off all over. You know, I think people would have appreciated that more. At least me. And to see him take a role where it's like he's, again, doting on his old hammer, can't get the hammer back. You know, he's the only one basically that's like hung up on the old relationship to the point of counting down to the last second of the day. It just, you know, he's the one being objectified, stripped down naked in front of a coliseum of people, all but being laughed at as the clown. I mean, it just doesn't feel like he was respected as a superhero character. And for me, as somebody who grew up watching superheroes, like, I feel like the direction that Marvel took when portraying this character couldn't have been more disrespectful to the fans. And it really was like rushed stories. I mean, you got the female Thor story and you got the gore story, but you didn't get a fleshed out version of it that made sense or that was coherent. It just felt like they were going to put a whole bunch of things together that they thought sounded good on paper, and then the execution was completely and totally botched and ruined. My message for anybody watching this movie, do it for free. Like, find it on like maybe like cable TV or something if it hits cable TV or something. Like, don't pay money to watch this. Don't buy the movie at all if you don't like the things that I've mentioned as like the detractors for this film. For me personally, it's a pass. I'll just stick to the older movies that did it better, frankly. I mean, like, there are even scenes, right? Like, they have these like almost like goat-like creatures that they have that scream the whole time. They're super annoying. And it's just like, at every extent, it's just like making Thor's character a jackass, and every extent of the word, and it's just like, it's just not a good film. It just really isn't, and it was really disappointing, you know. And I think maybe if somebody else would have had the project, it probably could have been better. But whoever ran this project into the ground did just that. So my final verdict for this movie, without giving up everything about the movie as far as spoilers, is that it's just really forgettable. There's not a whole lot going on there, and it's an easy F-ranked movie in my opinion, so I'd say pass on it. With that being said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this movie. Did you like it, and why? Let me know in the comments down below, and as always, thank you guys so much for watching the #1 brand in honesty. Until the next video, I'll see you guys later.